Welcome to Truth Be Told. I am Captain Ron with my partner in crime, Mr. Tony Sweet, today. Today, our guest is Frank Joseph. He's been the editor-in-chief of Ancient American Magazine since it debuted in 1993. He's also the author of over 20 books about prehistory, including many of the topics that we do love here on Truth Be Told, including the Atlantis Encyclopedia, opening of the Ark of the Covenant, and unearthing ancient aliens. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Frank Joseph. Frank, how you doing?
Wow, that's pretty gratifying. It's a pretty hard introduction to follow, but I'll do the best I can.
I know, that's about it. That's the end of the show.
We have a big audience here during the COVID times. It's amazing we're able to pull that off.
Sounds pretty scary.
Right.
I hope they're all wearing masks.
Right.
Right. Well, we are excited to have you here. You've been on the show before. I mean, you have so many books that we could touch on, but we're going to at least start with your latest book, Ancient High Tech: The Astonishing Scientific Achievements of Early Civilizations. And we've talked to many people on our show how so many of lost civilizations and civilizations of the past had a lot of technology that, because we just think it's sticks and bones and stuff they use, but they had a lot more technology than we even know. So can you give us a rundown of how you created this book and what did you find?
Well, the reason I created the book was all the other volumes that I've been working on about the past, and I tried to take a different point of view on the usual versions that we've been given in school. Found sometimes that those versions are not correct, and I've come to a really great respect for our ancestors who, as you said, were not just fooling around with bones and sticks.
Right.
The levels of technology that were achieved centuries and thousands of years ago is truly astounding. I was familiar with some of it, but as I continued my researches into it, I just was compelled to collect some of this material. Also, there have been a number of new discoveries about the capabilities of the ancients and some of the terrific things they've done in terms of medicine that have not been equal to this day.
Yeah.
Other inventions that were only reinvented thousands of years ago. And I just thought it was enormously important that at least we get an introduction to some of the more interesting and outstanding achievements of our ancestors.
Can you tell us, and I know Ron has a question,
No,
but
go ahead.
can you tell us, I mean, we've had so many civilizations in our past. Could you tell us maybe one of the civilizations that had the most technology that we would be surprised of?
Well, I don't know. There's so many, but just as an example, I would think it would be ancient Egypt.
Right.
That isn't probably too much of a surprise,
Not
I guess,
really.
to our listeners, because that civilization is generally known to have achieved great things in terms of architecture. But one thing I have learned, this is the last generalization I make here, one thing I have learned that really is, I think, come to the fore pretty obvious in these researches that I've been doing, is that if a civilization achieves something great in one particular area of culture, you can be sure that they achieved other levels of greatness just as high, if not greater, in other examples. As I said, for ancient Egypt, we all know about the Great Pyramid and the terrific achievements of their construction engineers. But far less well known was Egyptian science, especially Egyptian medical science. One of the things that's recently discovered, for example, is that the Egyptians were cancer-free.
Really?
As a people, cancer was virtually unknown amongst them. That information was validated only very recently, I think about 3 years ago, when a really comprehensive study of Egyptian mummies, and thousands of Egyptian mummies exist to this day, and a good study of them, well, it was bizarre that the results showed that there was no trace of cancer in like 99 or 98% of these mummies, which extended over a great period of time, thousands of years. And so now the hunt was on like, well, how was this possible? Was it their diet? No. What could it possibly have been? Well, now French archaeologists working with medical practitioners, which is a rare combination these days, were able to determine that there is a strong hint, actually it's more than a hint now, that the Egyptians were able to remain cancer-free, even though they lived pretty much the same as their neighbors in the Near East or throughout the Mediterranean. They lived cancer-free because of incense. The incense that they burned is known as frankincense. It's common today. It wasn't that common in the ancient world. They had to go traveling pretty far for it. But they burned copious amounts of incense in their temples and so forth, and in their homes. It's now understood that incense has enormous anti-cancer fighting properties, various kinds of cancer. So that this resin, that's what incense is. It's just a resin. And when it's burned, it smokes and creates this very fragrant white smoke. It still was used until fairly recently by the Catholic Church. The Catholics, of course, the early Christians picked it up from the ancients and used it not only in their holy areas, but also in just general meetings. But this cancer-fighting resin, when it's burned, is now being looked into seriously to contribute to modern, up-to-date methods of fighting cancer. This is the reason I like to mention frankincense, is because this is an example in which an ancient science not only was effective, extremely effective, but it's teaching us new methods that we have to improve our own medical conditions. So here is an example from the ancient past of a discovery which was, and even still is today, beyond what we know, because we have a serious cancer problem all throughout the entire world, of course. The global population suffers from various forms of cancer. And here was an example of fighting that in a very effective way. Other populations did suffer from cancer in the old days. That is understood, but not the Egyptians. And they're here to tell us that there's a remedy for this in their discovery.
It's incredible. Tony and I talk about this specific issue often on this show specifically, how this technology, for example, we talk about the Great Pyramid and people speculate they had outside help from perhaps ETs or something to build this. Something happens to this technology that it gets lost, even something like the frankincense.
Right.
It gets lost, and then 2,000 years again, we rediscover it. Why do you think that it is that happens?
Well, unfortunately, there is no mystery there. When a civilization, as we're being able to see right now, civilization is far more fragile than people realize, although they're beginning to realize the fragility of our civilization now. And when a civilization falls, it is not a pretty sight. It takes everything with it, All the achievements of a high culture that may have lasted for thousands of years can overnight, historically, be obliterated. What happened when the ancient world collapsed is that Western civilization, and actually not too long after that, Asian civilization in China, went into a prolonged Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages means that all of those achievements in terms of medicine and monumental construction and all these other things are gone, that are lost. And they're lost for hundreds of years. But fragments, tiny little suggestions, scraps of this former technology were found by early Renaissance scholars. And they patched together little remnants of what was found. Mostly these things were myths or legends. They couldn't believe that the ancients really achieved some of these things, but it was those small fragments that were responsible for the Renaissance. So our civilization, what we are today, really just stems from the Renaissance period. We've been in more or less, as a Western civilization, in continuous growth only from the Renaissance time. So our civilization is really not even 1,000 years old,
right,
because before that was darkness, ignorance, death, disease, and before that was all this greatness that was lost. So when our civilization goes, it's very possible that 1,000 years from now, people are going to be saying, oh, look, these people had a story about men flying to the moon. Well, how ridiculous that is for people that vanished. That's the same way that we look now, or we used to look, our scholars used to look at the great achievements of the ancients, which are now no longer scoffed at. We know now that they have achieved things that were precursors to what we have today, and we still have a lot to learn from them, like this cancer, for example.
Well, what's funny is, like, if I think about it, when I was a kid, or our grandparents would always tell us about, when my grandmother used to make some kind of potion, and it helped with a cold or blah blah blah, and then it is forgotten. It is funny how something, and frankincense. So every pretty much ancient Egypt movie you've talked, Moses, you heard of frankincense. How come even once we started getting back into understanding the importance of it, do you think we're not using it more? Because even herbalists and these new age doctors, I don't hear a lot of frankincense. Maybe they call it something different now, but I don't hear about that too much.
Well, actually, the Lancet, which is the foremost medical journal in the world, has had some very recent articles in which there are there's new work being done on trying to make frankincense available not just as a perfume or as an incense.
Right.
That they're thinking of having it in a kind of a tablet form, because it has to be done correctly. Now, this is the difficulty, of course. We don't know precisely how the ancient Egyptians administered this frankincense.
Right.
There are various different kinds of it, and if you take internally some of it, it will be very unhealthy for you. So we do know that this frankincense, there is a definite correlation now. According to the French, there is a definite correlation between anti-cancer antigens. Antigens are forms of proteins that fight cancer. There is a definite anti-cancer antigen in frankincense. However, the control mechanism that the ancient Egyptians had is still unknown, because not enough of that evidence not enough detailed evidence has survived. So there is still research being done on that. Another example, I won't go on to the medical thing that long. I don't mean to drag this out, but another example was not in Egypt, but in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks, in their medical kit for their army, would treat sword wounds, serious sword wounds, with honey, a poultice of honey. So that, let's say you got your forearm sliced really badly, which was common enough, open. The medic, a part of the medic's bag of medical supplies included prodigious amounts of honey. And so the person who had been wounded badly had the wound filled with honey, and then a poultice applied, and then on top of this poultice was included a form of cinnamon and some other elements. We don't know what they were. It's been since found out that honey applied in this way, is the most effective way to treat a wound like that, because it immediately seals the wound off from infection, and it immediately begins with its enzymes to start the healing process very quickly. The cinnamon and other unknown elements that were applied to the outside of the poultice, those were used to fight off insects, because naturally if you're walking around with an armful of honey, you're going to be attracting a lot of insects.
Right.
But the Greeks understood that this mixture of cinnamon and some other elements effectively kept off most insects. This information is like brand new. I mean, relatively speaking, I don't think it was found more than about 5 years ago, when the enzymes discovered in honey are now being treated in a kind of a poultice, believe it or not. There are people today who have had incidents like this, like sword cuts or a tool or something injures them, and this solution of honey now is being applied just the same way as it was more than 2,000 years ago, going on 3,000 years ago. And we've only just learned that. That's new.
That's great.
Before these Greek and Egyptian remedies were understood, were translated, when they were scoffed at, mostly by archaeologists who thought, just as an example of how primitive these people were, they could somehow make pyramids, but they regard all this as magic and so on. Well, it shows you how ignorant the archaeologists were, because now medical science understands the enzyme properties of a very quick healing and anti-infection properties involved in the application of honey.
Well, we're talking about something that was kind of got lost in translation, with frankincense and how, but even in your book, you even talk about how even technology was invented before the actual written on paper invention, such as sulfuric matches and bicycles. Can you talk about that? I found that fascinating, that this was way before somebody actually invented it. Could you talk about that?
Well, that is truly amazing. There is a temple in India, and I don't even know if I can pronounce this properly, although I've got it written on.
Ron can.
I'll just call it the Panch Temple, because it's a much longer name. This Panch Temple goes back at least to about 150 A.D. In other words, it's going on to about 2,000 years old. That's the official dating of this temple. They have it going back to about 150 A.D. Well, what's amazing about this temple is in a dark area, it shows a man unquestionably riding a bicycle. Well, it was assumed, somebody must have come in to the temple and sketched this thing out. Well, make a long story short, that bas-relief showing a man on a bicycle, and there's no question that that's what he's doing. I have a great photograph of it in the book. That particular pillar was determined even long before this bicycle bas-relief was found to be one of the original unrepaired blocks in the temple.
That's
so
crazy.
This particular column is at least 1,800 or more years old. Now, the first bicycle, I think, was invented by a German fellow, von Dries, in 1817. That's the first known bicycle. There's no other evidence of anything like a bicycle. It was a clumsy affair. And that first bicycle, built in 1817, is far inferior to the bicycle shown on the Panch Temple that goes back more than 1,800 years ago. So, that's another example of how far in advance our ancestors were. Other temples not far from the Panch Temple unquestionably show highly advanced machining. And we're talking about not just beautiful carvings, we're talking about power tools that the ancients had. There's not even a question about it, that they possessed some kind of power tools which were superior in some regards to anything we have. Why do we know they're superior? Because some of the pillars in these Hindu temples, which go back 2,000 and more years ago, some of these pillars are substantially huge. They'll weigh like 50 tons. But the evidence from the pillars themselves, they're high gloss. The workmanship on them shows that they were on a lathe of some kind. Now that seems impossible, putting today a 50-ton stone on a lathe and working it with beautiful artistic designs, and yet there it is.
It's incredible.
It's astounding.
I mean, yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. When you look at it and they come back and do the testing and go on, this has to be 1,000 years ago.
That bike's 1,800. That's amazing. It's reminiscent of the little airplanes they find by the pyramids.
Right.
Or the helicopter glyphs.
The most amazing in that regard, the aviation that they achieved. There's no doubt also that there's some recent studies on this. There was looked like a little wooden glider. It's like a little model airplane that was found inside an Egyptian tomb. And the Egyptian tomb was first dated to about 200 B.C. It now turns out that tomb is much older. They dated the little airplane to 200 B.C. because of the material with it. Since it's turned out, our Egyptologists have since learned that the material involved in finding this little model airplane was all mixed up and with other earlier periods. And so in sorting it out, that little model airplane is far older, more than hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 or more years older. So that little airplane could easily be 3,000 years old. Of course, skeptics says, well, it isn't an airplane. It looks like an airplane, but it probably is something like a weather vane. Why anybody would want themselves buried with a weather vane is something kind of difficult to understand. But in my book, I was able to show that this aeronautical engineer in England, an aeronautical engineer, ran computer simulation tests at the University of Leeds. The University of Leeds has one of the top simulation computers for ancient artifacts. And so he was able to use the computer simulation at the University of Leeds on this little airplane. So what it looks like. Is it really an airplane, or is it represent a bird, or what is it? Does it have any kind of aerodynamic characteristics? Well, to cut to the chase on this, that little model is entirely aerodynamic. It possesses all of the attributes of a glider, so that there's no other conclusion you can draw from that except that this is a model of something they had on a larger scale. People say, well, how come we haven't found this glider? Well, it's made of perishable materials. You're not going to find too much light wood that's going to survive 3,000 years of history. So the Egyptians did definitely have at least the power of glided flight. What they used it for, actually, Egypt would be a wonderful place, and is a wonderful place, to do glider flight, because you have such a hot climate. You have the thermals rising over the desert. A little glider like that, fully manned, a sizable one that's large enough to carry a man into the air, would be able to stay indefinitely above Egypt, at least during the daylight hours, because of all the high thermals. So perhaps they were able to use it, not for, I don't think, military applications or anything like that, but nonetheless, they knew the technology for it. They knew, and they had the technology for it. They understood that. And if you can understand the technology for it, you can build it. And they did.
Hey, Frank, what about some other high-tech things? We always hear on this show that it seems in all the different cultures, the megalithic structures, they were able to move these giant stones back in the day. Have you found out anything more about how that was done?
No. It is a complete mystery. There's a place called Baalbek, which is in Lebanon. And Baalbek, no one knows who made this place. We know that the Romans came in and built upon it, as other cultures had done. But the original site for this, which is in a remote area of Lebanon, it's open to the public. It's been known for well over 100 years. Archaeologists finding many interesting things, but no one knows who built this place. The stones involved, the cut stones that were moved, and not only moved, but transported on top of other stones, are beyond any crane capability available today. So how was it possible that a people living, who knows how long ago, thousands of years ago, at least 2,000 years ago, how was it conceivable that they could lift, for example, a 175-ton block of stone that had been quarried, lifted into the air on top of another stone? Now, that is a technology that we not only do not possess, there's no way we can figure that out. How is it possible that a people living 2,000 years ago in the pre-industrial age, with supposedly no electrical power, I don't care how many thousands of workers you have, there's no way that you can lift something like that and fit it into such perfect proportions. Yeah. There's another site which is even older than, far older than Baalbek. It's in France. It's on the west coast of France. And there's a stone there. It's known in the Breton language as Ergra. And Ergra has been dated to, confidently overdated, to well over 4,000 years ago. Yeah. It's a Neolithic. It's a new Stone Age stone.
Well, that's not still there, is it?
Pardon me?
Is that still there?
It's on the coast of France.
Okay.
It's on the coast. It's called Ergra. And this stone, which was originally about 60-some feet tall, in itself, how do you erect this thing? It's about 67 feet tall originally. It was shaped, and it is placed in such precision that it is used as a gnomon. A gnomon, G-N-O-M-E-N. A gnomon is a stick or a stone that you set up that's in alignment with various astronomical phenomena, like position of the sun or the moon or different constellations. That's what this thing is. In other words, they got this stone, which weighs, I think, like over 200 tons. Now we're talking about the Stone Age. They set this stone up so perfectly that it aligned itself with various astronomical phenomena. There was a brilliant astronomer by the name of a Scottish astronomer by the name of Alexander Thom, Thom, and he was interested in air gras, and he said, yes, this thing is a gnomon, and it had precise orientations to various lunar phenomena. So you not only have to set this stone up, but you have to set it up in such a way that it has an alignment that lasts for thousands of years. I mean, the technology to have done this is gone, but the effect of that technology is still there. You can still go to air gras, and you can see this thing. It stood from about 2,800 BC until sometime in the 17th century, when a major earthquake knocked it over. So you can go to air gras today. It's broken into three pieces, and it's not difficult at all to recreate its position. It's all quite there. Nobody can move these pieces away. So there's another example of the incredible high tech that was at the command of our ancestors so long ago. And we don't know how some of these things are made, which means that they possessed a superior technology to ours in some respects.
Hey, Frank, I want to ask you this, and for everybody tuning in, this is Frank Joseph. He has a brand new book out called Ancient High Tech, The Astonishing Scientific Achievements of Early Civilizations, and you can pick this up on Amazon and intertraditions.com. Please pick that up. But, we're just now in our age, in 2020, really getting into the robotics and and they're talking by 2050 with artificial intelligence. But in your book, you said you're exploring examples of high-tech technology from the ancient in robotics. Could you talk in AI? Could you talk about that? That's fascinating.
It is. It is really fascinating, and it's hard to believe that the ancients were already working on artificial intelligence. Some of these accounts are apocryphal. We only have the story. Others are extremely well documented. There was a very outstanding capital of science, of applied science, by the way, in the ancient world. It was known as Alexandria in Egypt. And Alexandria attracted, for I guess about 300 or more years, some of the greatest minds and scholars of the ancient world. And some of these scholars were involved in creating devices which were far beyond their time. And we know that these devices existed because they were described by other scholars. The devices themselves, of course, no longer exist because built of perishable materials, as I said, time has destroyed them. But scientists, even mainstream scholars, are aware, for example, of a scientist by the name of Heron, Heron. And Heron lived about 200 BC. And he was able to create a number of what were known as automatic or automated devices, automata. And one of these devices that he created involved a kind of a movable stage, so that the stage would move along, and as it moved, it created a band of human beings or human-like creatures, humanoid creatures who would play individual instruments. The music would be performed. A little fountain would be part of the performance, and then this movable stage would turn around and go back right where it came from. This is an amazing thing for people that had no mechanical power sources that we have today. The ancient Chinese really excelled in some of these automated devices. especially this one that was known to be a kind of a manservant, which was able to do some chores in the imperial household. Even pieces of this device still exist, although they're controversial. But it was a kind of a robotic manservant that did household chores. It did more than household chores, though. It was developed and improved over time until it also became a sex robot. Hey. And the Empress was found being serviced by this sex robot by the Emperor, who had the robot dismantled after that. But that's amazing. Part of the lore that's involved with these automata. The Greeks had an outstanding robotic or artificial intelligence. It was known as Talos, T-A-L-O-S. And Talos was a robot, a military robot that was used to guard the seacoast of Crete. And this robot would move on its own and was somehow able to determine between friend and foe. So if you were approaching the coast of Crete, and the robot determined that you were an invader, the robot would hurl a number of weapons in the direction of that particular approaching enemy. This Talos is enshrined in myth. However, numerous scientists, conventional scientists even, believe that this myth is based on an actual invention that was deployed for military purposes by the ancient Greeks. It was first written up seriously by popular mechanics of all sources. And so Talos is regarded as an early precursor of some kind of an early warning and self-defense self-automated device. There were quite a few others like this. I don't really go into it in too much detail because unlike some of the other things discussed in the book, these things are mostly legendary. Right. But there's a consistency in these legends which speak of something that was probably more permanent.
It's interesting stuff. What about the Great Pyramid? What do you think that was?
Well, the Great Pyramid, I conclude the book with the Great Pyramid because that was probably the supreme achievement of the ancient world, or certainly one of the supreme achievements of the ancient world. There's a very brilliant scholar. His name is Christopher Dunn, and he is a machinist engineer. He owns his own factory in Danville, Illinois, and he's devoted the last, I guess must be almost 30 years of his life now, to examining the great achievements of ancient Egypt, especially the Great Pyramid. And Christopher Dunn wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant. And he concludes from his intensive research and investigations of the Great Pyramid that it was never, ever designed as a tomb, that the internal configurations of the Great Pyramid do not match in any respect at all, in any details, a tomb. Matter of fact, it's impossible to have anything near the great processions that the Egyptians had for their pharaohs, especially inside the Great Pyramid, which is very small. Any of our listeners who have ever been to the Great Pyramid, been inside, as many millions of people have been, know that it's very small and cramped inside, that has no decoration at all. There's nothing monumental inside the Great Pyramid. So it makes it impossible to negotiate a clumsy sarcophagus or even to include more than a few hundred people at a time inside the Great Pyramid. The configuration of the interior indicates to Christopher Dunn that it could only match one thing. It's a device, an electronic device. If you were to take a cross-section of the Great Pyramid, and there are many books that have the interior configuration of the Great Pyramid shown, it resembles only one thing, not a burial system. It represents closely a device which is known as a transubstantiator. It's in other words, it's a device which is able to take mechanical energy and transform it into electrical energy.
Wow.
It's a transducer. It's a kind of a transducer. This device has been known for well over 100 years. And the Great Pyramid appears to be what is known as a geotransducer. It takes mechanical energy, in other words, seismic energy, and transforms it into electrical energy. And that's what you really need if you're establishing a civilization in the Nile Valley, because the Nile Valley used to be seismically very active. They had numerous destructive earthquakes. Those earthquakes over time have diminished, although they had a serious one there about 100 or so years ago. And so the Great Pyramid was built, according to Christopher Dunn, as a kind of a geotransducer that would take the mechanical energy of the shaking earth and transform it into an electrical discharge. And I think that he's absolutely correct. I've been to the Great Pyramid several times myself, long before I even heard about Christopher Dunn's work. And I believe that that's what this device is. It's a device which is beyond anything we know today. There's nothing like this today, which is able to transform destructive earthquake energies into electrical energies.
Kind of like
it's
a lightning rod.
It's a truly amazing achievement, the greatest achievement possible of the ancient world.
And it's not damaged. It
That's
still
what I was
stands.
gonna say, yeah.
I mean, it was designed
Well,
for
it does.
that.
It does have some damages. There are some damages, and that's why it doesn't work the way that it used to be, although it still does work from time to time. For example, the top of the Great Pyramid today is sometimes seen to emit a blue light, and that blue light is exactly all the agitated ions that are affected when there's seismic activity. That blue light that has been actually photographed as well as just eyewitnessed from time to time has been correlated with seismic activity at the same time, going on simultaneously at the Great Pyramid. So it's hard for people to imagine that such a thing was really built, and that's what it is. But the evidence clearly shows that the Great Pyramid is a form of technology which we have yet to invent and certainly could use.
Amazing.
Well, we have about 12 minutes left, and I know we want to do some. I know it's going so fast.
Is it time?
Well, first I want to ask one
ahead.
question from the chat room, and then Ron, one of his favorite subjects.
Oh, yeah.
So Catherine was saying, please ask Frank about the crop circle with the molecule he spoke on. Tell us about that, because I'm not familiar with that. So tell us.
That's a complete, now as they used to say on Mighty Python, now for something completely different. There is and we don't have much time.
Right.
I'll do this as quickly as I can. There was a crop circle that appeared in England, in Wiltshire, England, early last month. And the interesting thing about this particular crop circle is that it is unlike any other crop circle that has ever been seen or documented, and there are over 10,000 of them that have been documented since the 1970s. This particular crop circle represents a particular molecule, a molecule. Why would that, if somebody is going to make this, now I'm not saying it's ETs or anything, we haven't got time to discuss that, but nonetheless, why would anybody go the trouble of making a great crop circle, and the thing is like about 200 feet, I forgot off my top of my head, it's 200 feet by 200 feet, it's quite sizable. It's in a very obscure area of Wiltshire, and it's a molecule. Well, what kind of a molecule is it? It's a molecule for a particular hydrocarbon. And this hydrocarbon, if used in conjunction with another earlier crop circle, offers the cure for COVID-19.
No way. I didn't think that's what he said.
I wasn't ready to go there.
It does.
No.
And that molecule is well known. It is not available because the patent for that particular molecule is held by a pharmaceutical company which purchased the patent on that molecule and is not releasing it. But that
Boy,
is
there's a can of worms sitting underneath this.
Right. That's a whole nother show.
Wow.
That's a whole nother show. And it takes a long time to discuss it properly. But
we may have to have you back.
That's
to
an
talk
ongoing
about that.
story. That's an ongoing story.
All right.
You'll
well,
have to look into that.
Well,
yeah.
that was for you, Catherine. So, and now to finish out.
By the way, I'll send you the information on that if
Please.
you'd like, and you
Please
can do
Definitely.
what you
Yeah,
like.
please do. I'd love to see it. All right.
Yeah,
so,
I'll do that.
So one of Captain Ron's favorite subject is synchronicity.
The number one, yes.
And so, and you had a book about it. So you guys just go at it.
Yeah, I would really love to know your thoughts. We ask a lot of people about this topic, but you actually wrote a whole book. So I would love to hear what your thoughts and conclusions are with the phenomenon of synchronicity, because they happen to us all the time.
Well, that's very good that they do, and that's very good that you acknowledge them. I've written a couple of books on synchronicity. It really fascinated me more than anything else at an earlier period in my life, and it still continues to engage me, because I believe that synchronicity is the true modern mystical experience. Synchronicity, for our listeners not familiar with it, is really nothing more than a word for a meaningful coincidence. So, for example, let's say you haven't thought about somebody for 20 years, and you just happen to think about them again. Oh, I haven't thought about that person. The phone rings, and it's that person. Well, things like that happen to everybody all the time. We dismiss them as just statistical inevitabilities, but they're not. And I found that if you keep a record of your synchronicities, you'll be amazed at the mystical organization of your life. Just an ordinary person who has these meaningful coincidences, if they document them, they reveal some kind of a real connection with what I believe is the true identity of God. I don't believe that God is some anthropomorphic vision sitting in the clouds with a long beard, throwing some people in hell and allowing other people to come to the heavenly city. But what I do believe is that there is a conscious intelligence, a consciousness, just like your consciousness, which pervades absolutely everything. So the identity of God, if you want to use that term even, this concept is even bigger than the concept of God. As Carl Jung said, the last impediment in understanding what God is God. In other words, when you get past that, you see that there is a cohesive consciousness in absolutely not everything, but every energy, everything. There is a consciousness, and that the synchronicities that we experience are those illuminating moments that put us in touch with that. They're the true modern mystical experience, because everybody has them, and if we acknowledge them, it presents a kind of a connection. We are connected with these things, and there's a guidance involved in it. If you pay attention to your synchronicities, your life will improve. And the basis of synchronicity is passion. If you are passionately involved in something or someone, that's when your synchronicities will arise. They'll constellate. If your life is rather boring and you don't have any particular interests in anything and rather bored, then your synchronicities decline. So it's as though this consciousness is telling you to live the authentic life and to follow that passion that is in you. That apparently is the goal of life, is for you to find out what you are most interested in, what most turns you on, whatever it is, whether people like it or they don't, and you follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell used to say. That's the real meaning of life, and that's the meaning that is apparently suggested by these synchronicities, is you're to follow that aspect of your life that is really you. You do not what other people tell you to do necessarily. First, you do what is most important. This has nothing to do with egotism or selfishness or greed, not at all, because there's a lot of self-sacrifice involved. But it's good. That's what you need to do, is to follow what is really you, to become everything that you are, everything that you are capable of doing. That's what synchronicity is all about,
awesome.
In a nutshell. I mean, I've written 2 books on this.
I think you did pretty good.
I can't think of any more to summarize it.
Right,
Do you do that? Do you write them down and keep track of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's weird is...
And I find that there's terrific guidance involved. The thing that I can guarantee for anybody that writes down their synchronicities in a little journal, that over time, it might take weeks or months, you're going to be shocked to read that there are patterns involved. and that there are cycles involved in your own life you had no idea existed, and that you have been guided in your life by these tiny little subtleties, far more so than you realize. So there is a consciousness out there which is interested in you individually. There is a consciousness that holds together the entire universe or multiverse, and yet it is interested in you as an individual. That's what this omniscience is.
Amazing.
And it's the only kind of conclusion that I can draw from this.
Wow.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, and this is so interesting. And what was funny when we're sitting here listening to you, somebody's name popped in my head, and then like 2 seconds later, they called me.
Come on.
No, I'm not making it up. I'm not making it up.
No, that's great.
I was like,
now, you don't lose that. You have to write that down, because
right.
You'll see how that one particular synchronicity will plug into another one, maybe months from now, but it'll hook up. There are all these lines of connection in your own life. It's very important. So keep a synchronicity journal. I tell that to everybody. It'll change your life. It'll give you a true enlightenment. The only real true enlightenment is the enlightenment you can get on your own, and your synchronicity journal will do that for you.
Well, Frank, once again, thank you so much. You just blew our minds, and everybody loves, you're one of those you can sit
all day
back,
guests.
You can just sit back and listen to you talk.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. Meanwhile, I will send you that link on that I have on the COVID-19 crop circle.
Please do.
And if that caller is interested in it, and others, they can go to you for that.
Great. And please go get the book, Ancient High Technology, The Astonishing Scientific Achievements of Early Civilizations by Frank Joseph. Go to Amazon and go to intertraditions.com. And Captain Ron and I are so happy that you're here, and all you people in the chat room and people that listen to us. And we just got announced that we're now not only on iHeart and Apple and all that stuff, we just got released on Amazon music podcast. They just released that. Good. So now we're on there, so you can listen to us anywhere you want. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll figure out who our guest is. Go to truthbetold worldwide.com. That will show you all our upcoming guests. And again, share this show, and please leave comments, and if it's negative, make it about Captain Ron. Okay?
Ouch.
All right. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.